Lords of War, Elves vs. Lizardmen, Volume 1. Written by Martin Vaux and read by Tom Barratt. Part 9. The Ride to War. Belladir's storm rider prodded at the fire with the end of his spear. "Seems ironic," said the elven cavalry master, "to have come all this way to only add to the ash." The Aegis regiment, of which Belladir was now part, had now been riding through the ashen savannah for 2 days and a night. They had stopped only to eat, but not to sleep, and amongst the ragtag band spliced together in haste by the royal council, the lack of rest was beginning to wear away any sense of camaraderie. "We're elves," came a response from the darkness behind him. The voice belonged to Narcissus Foxglove, the elusive bowman. "We like to watch things burn." This bleak characterization was not something Belladir had heard before, but he supposed it was true. His fellow elves, particularly those of the royal lines with which he spent the majority of his time, liked to think of themselves as lovers of nature, as stewards of the forests, and protectors of the birds and beasts. But in reality, he knew few elves who liked to get their hands dirty. He had never planted anything or watched it grow, but burning things, he had done plenty of that. "You speak in truths, Narcissus," Belladir replied after a time. "Might I ask where your wisdom comes from?" Narcissus, who until this moment had been sat, cross-legged on the ground with his cloak pulled around him, stood and walked up close to the dying fire. He pulled down his hood and then looked deep into Belladir's eyes. Belladir looked back. "I see," said Belladir. Unlike many high elves, Belladir took no issue with his low-born countrymen. The sign was plain for all to see if they looked, although it was rare for elves to ever look one another in the eye, especially across boundaries of class. When they did, however, the clear pupils of the high elves distinguished them eerily from their counterparts of lesser breeding. Creatures of other ilk tended to find it unnerving, of course. Normally, when looking into the eyes of a creature, you expect to see where it is looking. With high elves you could not. Their eyes, which looked more like marble or pallid ivory, gave nothing away. It was said that this was a gift dating back to their Lightseer heritage. Narcissus pulled his hood back up and over his head, obscuring his face once again. Belladir, meanwhile, returned to poking the fire, and it was some time before he spoke again. When he did speak, he had another question, one which he was loath to ask, but his curiosity got the better of him. "Where did you get those scars?" he inquired. Narcissus stood, watching the flames. "My father," he said. The two fell silent as the fire popped and spattered. From behind, a larger cohort of elves approached. 2 of Belladir's royal guards, flanked by Iridia and Amara, Narcissus's companions from the Forgotten University, and the youngest commander of their company, the West Watch rider Vanir Alfheim. "We have brought wine," said one of the royal guards. "It may be your last chance to enjoy a drop before we arrive and the battles begin." Belladir smiled heartily, flashing the grin which was known to raise the pulse of even the most high-born elven ladies. "Well, well," Belladir replied. "Shall we share a flagon?" The small assembly of warriors mumbled sounds of assent, and various mismatched goblets, cups, and bowls were quickly sought and portions of wine poured. A second flagon was also fetched, and a third, just in case. Belladir then raised a toast. "To the 7 kingdoms," he said, puffing out his chest before draining his goblet in one ambitious mouthful. As he swallowed, his face seemed to fall. "That," he declared, "was delicious. Reminds me of home." "Where is home?" inquired the young elf from Westwatch. "Northwatch, my boy," said Belladir. "Surely you have heard of me. Belladir Stormrider, Rider of the North, the bane of Orkfell?" "I apologize," replied Vanir, "but we receive little news of the North in the halls of Hrothganna. Have you fought in many great battles?" Belladir looked up to the clear sky and saw the all but infinite numbers of stars radiating out light from the heavens. "Not many," he replied. "In reality, I ride out with some elves when it takes my fancy and attack those greenskins foolish enough to venture out into the field. The caves around Orkfell are teeming with orcs and goblins. Nobody knows how deep those caverns run. We don't venture down too far into them, but we keep their menace at bay. Still, it makes for some good stories." "I have never seen battle," said Vanir. The drinkers fell quiet, listening to the young elf speak. "My brother was the fighter, really. You may have heard of him, Laerto Alfheim, the Rider of the Wind."
"By the gods!" boomed Belladere. "You are Laerto Alfheim's brother? Of course I have heard of him. His name is legend."
"I knew him well. We used to drink together. How is the old devil?" Vanir said nothing, and he was glad for the night's shadows, as they obscured the view his new companions might have had of his now blushing cheeks. "The Rider of the Wind was badly injured," came the voice of Amara Silvershadow. Her timbre was dark and deep, full of feeling. Vanir's cheeks flushed harder. He knew full well that it should be his brother on this adventure, and not him, and if it wasn't Laerto, it should have been Vander or Iberus. They were the infamous ones. They knew how to fight. Vanir knew that he had been sent here by his mother for revenge. She wanted the earth to run red with the blood of Lizardmen. Her favourite son had been slain, so she had sent the second in line to take vengeance in his stead.
"Well now," said Belladere, "let us not be maudlin.
I apologize for my lack of tact, young prince, but none of us came all this way to bring down the mood. Admittedly, I would rather be sat in a cosy inn somewhere, brandishing a hand of cards instead of a spear. But we have all ridden south for glory, have we not?" Belladere slapped Vanir on the shoulder. "Have we not, young rider?" Out of the darkness, a rapid movement took all by surprise. The end of an ornate staff sailed through the air and landed on the side of Belladere's head with an almighty crack. The Rider of the North fell to the ground unconscious, spilling his wine over the grey powder beneath their feet, and his royal guards drew their weapons in an instant. "Stand down," said Narcissus, who by now had an arrow notched to his bowstring. "There's no danger. He only got what was coming to him." Iridia Lifria stepped forward, her full form and staff now visible in the low light of the campfire. "I apologize," she said, "but I couldn't bear to listen to him prattling on any longer." The royal guards looked at one another, and then at Iridia. They then resheathed their swords and began topping up everyone's servings of wine. More firewood was fetched, the last of what had been brought, and fresh logs were placed onto the fire. The various warriors then sat down around the blaze, and the conversation started anew. "So, where have you all come from?" Vanir asked, his mood now somewhat restored. It was Narcissus who spoke first. "Well, immediately we have come from the Whispering Woods. We three are the guardians of the forest, appointed by the Forgotten University."
"Can you speak to the trees?"
Vanir exclaimed excitedly.
"I've heard of elves who can speak to trees."
The three guardians chuckled. "Yes, we can," said Narcissus, "although it is they who speak to us, really."
"I can't imagine," said Vanir, his voice full of wonder. "What's it like when it first happens?"
"When it first happens," came the deep voice of Amara Silvershadow, "you think you are losing your mind." "Oh, I don't know about that," said Iridia. "For me it's slightly different. I've always lived in the Forgotten University. I know no different."
"You have always lived there?"
asked Vanir.
"Who are your parents?"
"I thought the mages were forbidden from having children." "They are," replied Iridia. "I was left at the Forgotten University as an infant. I never knew who my parents were. Well, not until—" Iridia had been given the news by Ockram the Wise on the day they left the Whispering Woods. He had told her quietly, while no others were present, because the Archmage knew what was to come.
"Until what?"
Vanir inquired, not thinking.
"Do you know now?"
"Oh yes," said Iridia, "I know now. I don't feel like it can be true, but I suppose it must be." Narcissus and Amara listened intently. They had no inkling that their friend had learned of her mysterious lineage. To them, she had always been a daughter of elven labourers born out of wedlock, against the will of the King's Mount and outside of the Church of Draconis. "Do you have a family?" asked Vanir. Iridia nodded. "I do." She looked at Belladere's Storm Rider, unconscious in front of the fire. She kicked his insentient form somewhat playfully, and the cavalry master's body rocked a little, stirring up a small plume of ash. "Apparently," Iridia continued, "that is my half-brother."
"What?"
Narcissus said, suddenly incensed and baffled in equal measure.
"Your father is Gesalt of Northwatch."
"Oh no," said Iridia. "My mother was Aurelia, Gesalt's first wife. They called her the Stargazer, according to Ockram. She was said to be a great beauty and a scholar of the celestial movements." "What happened to her?" asked Narcissus. "She died," said Iridia, kicking Belladere's limp body again, "giving birth to him."
"What of your father?"
Vanir asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. "Well, That's the part I'm finding even harder to believe." "How so?" said Amara. "Well, according to the Archmage, my father is the High King." Every elf around the campfire seemed to shuffle back from their perch. Weapons were rustled and great exhalations were made. "How could such a thing be possible?" said Narcissus. "You are like me. Your eyes, they are low-born, and your hair... The High King's heirs are blonder than wheat." Iridia shrugged. "I can only presume that my mother was not wholly high-born. It's the only explanation. Unless, of course, Okron was mistaken. He is known to be. You know as well as I that if there wasn't an apprentice there to assist him, then he would forget to put on his robes in the morning and would spend the day wandering around half naked." The smiles prompted by Iridia's comment only half masked the unrest amongst the elves around the campfire. The royal guards present did not know whether to leap to attention and attend to this stranger's every whim. Perhaps their proclamations were only camp stories, or the beginning of a longer, more elaborate joke. Or were her claims treasonous? What was the protocol in such a situation? Vanir Alfheim was the only elf to move. He rose, standing tall, before coming down onto one knee in front of Iridia. "My lady," he said, bowing low. "Please," said Iridia, who now had her turn to blush. "Please don't do that. At worst, everything I have said is the mistaken word of a tired old elf, and at best I am a bastard. I am deserving of no special treatment, and neither do I want any." Vanir did not move. Iridia shifted from her sitting position, leaving her staff in the dirt, and leaned forwards. She reached out a hand and placed it under Vanir's chin, drawing his face up to meet hers. Their eyes locked, and she smiled. "Sit down, you silly boy." Vanir grinned for what felt like the first time in days, and did as Iridia asked. The royal guards, meanwhile, did nothing but watch on, still too stunned to speak. "Have you told him?" said Narcissus, bringing a battered bowl full of wine to his lips. "Told who?" "The Prince Regent, our commander, you know, the liege lord, our general, warden of the partition, and heir to the oaken throne." "There hasn't been a good moment," said Iridia. "He's been riding ahead of us since we passed through the gates of the Crucible. He and his partition forces keep themselves to themselves, and besides, what would I say? Hello, I am your illegitimate half-sister, here to help you reclaim a lost dragon egg from an enemy none has battled in centuries, in a strange, corrupted land. If you have a moment between scouting and drawing up battle plans, you, me, and the Rider of the North should sit down and have a family reunion." "Come on, Narcissus. I'm a royal bastard like you. We do as the trees command, that is all." It was true, thought Narcissus. His father, King Lubral of Southwatch, had gone to great lengths to keep him and his family separate. Perhaps that was the way life was supposed to be for elves such as them. After a long while of saying nothing, it was then Amara Silvershadow's time to speak. "We are all royal bastards, then, are we not?" Vanir turned to Amara, who was barely visible in the darkness. Only her hair, dazzling white, was plain to see, reflecting the blue glow of the stars up above. "You are low-born too?" asked Vanir. "But your eyes, I only presumed—" "You are not mistaken, in a sense," said Amara. "I am of royal blood, but I have no father." "Come now, Amara," said Narcissus. "Everyone has a father." The drow princess snorted. "Everyone but me," she said. Draining her cup and placing it rim down on the carpet of ash, she inhaled deeply and then sighed. What?" muttered Vanir, who by now not only felt he knew these strange elves, but that their honesty, companionship, and love for one another meant that he would fight and die for them without question. "You know my history, do you not?" said Amara to Narcissus, pointedly, and with little kindness in her voice. "I do," replied Narcissus, "and it is a dark tale, even for a night such as this." "Tonight," Amara continued, "is as good a time as any to tell you the rest of the tale. For tomorrow we fight, and in fighting we may die. Then the truth could be lost forever." The royal guards, now suddenly re-engaged, went from cup to goblet to bowl, draining the rest of the second flagon of wine, and then unstoppering and breaking into the third. "My journey to the Whispering Woods was a bloody one," said Amara, "but such is the way of the drow. My mother, Queen Rakshaka, has ruled the Dark Elves for millennia. She is known as Rakshaka the Ageless, for it appears to outsiders that she never grows older. She appears a beautiful creature, divine almost, but in truth her youth comes at a terrible cost.
But all elves live for centuries, said Vanir, interjecting. I don't understand.
Amara smiled grimly. Unlike other elves, the drow have a secret. It is a twist of fate, an unkindness that sets us apart. For as you know, my people do not mix with other elves. They live in isolation, their ways veiled in secrecy behind the high walls of Solanum, the city itself hidden deep within the clotted vines of the bloodwood. The drow do this because, unlike the rest of the Lightseer lineage, we live only for decades. 30 at most. Our lives burn away like candles, all too quickly extinguished.
But Amara, said Iridia, suddenly afraid, we've grown up together over 2 centuries.
Amara nodded. Yes, she continued, and my best years are now behind me, I fear.
Wait, said Narcissus. You said that Queen Rakshaka had ruled for millennia. How could such a thing be possible?
Precisely, Amara chuckled. And there's the rub. For the way of the drow is blood. Our magics and our learning is focused and dedicated to purification of blood. My people are obsessed with discovering a cure to our ailment, a way to reverse the cruel harrowing of time, and it would seem, long ago, that a discovery was made that, while it seems yet impossible to prevent a drow from aging, indeed to prevent a drow from dying, it is possible to give a drow a second life, a life in which they might make up for the errors of their past, a method by which the drow might be born again anew.
I don't understand, said Vanir. What does that mean?
It means, said Amara, that drow children very rarely have fathers, unless you count the mages whose great works allow us to be born.
What? Said Narcissus. Does that mean...
Yes, said Amara. It means that I am, in a sense, Queen Rakshaka. I was, at least, born to her, an identical version of her. I am my mother through and through, and it was my destiny to reverse her mistakes, to study blood magic as she did and identify the solution to the woes of the drow.
But you fled, said Narcissus. You broke out of the Mage Academy. The trees told me that you killed dozens of drow in your escape, that even as a child you arrived in the Whispering Woods, soaked to the bone in their blood.
All that is true, declared Amara, now looking down at the ash beneath her. And ever since, the current queen has sought to reclaim me. But the current queen is not so much my mother as my sister, another version of me created in the wake of my departure, and she does not know what she's doing. None of the drow do. They fail to recognize that all things must die. It is the nature of existence. The purpose of the drow is to remind elfkind of that fact. We are to stand as a reminder to all that you only have one life, and that you are to choose how to live it. No sooner than Amara had said these words, it became clear to all that far on the horizon the sun was rising. In the distance, the banner of the Prince Regent was visible. He was riding back to the main body of his battalion, the first wave of the many who were to come if they failed in their mission. A little way off, the ashfall raged. Its surface was streaked with lightning, but it had fallen silent. The general had clearly done something to stop the storm's cacophony, and as he rode back towards them, each of the company knew that today they had chosen to live and to die for one another. The sunlight moved over the surface of the ashen savannah like fingers over parchment, sliding over the dunes and sending the skies purple red. The elves could all see now, up above them, that Pterodons was circling. Perhaps they had been there all night, scouting their movements, reporting back to their masters to the south. When the morning's radiance struck Belladere Stormrider's unconscious face, he came to, blinking hard and shaking his head.
"What happened?" he said. "Did I drink too much?"
"Yes, my lord," said one of the royal guards, who stood and helped him to his feet.
"Come now,"
said the other.
"Let us get you back on your horse. We ride to war."
The Stormrider stumbled back to the main body of the battalion, one guard on each arm, and those who remained around the dying embers of the campfire smiled to one another. As Vanir looked from Iridia to Narcissus to Amara, he didn't know what to say. He only had more questions for them, and he was embarrassed to have asked so many already. His curiosity would have to wait for another day, he thought.